Evening, folks. Settle in now. Joe Rivers here, back with another story for you on Voices of Justice. Tonight, we're riding into a corner of the Montana Territory where the mountains scratch at the sky like angry claws, and the wind whispers secrets through the pines, secrets best left buried. We talk a lot about justice out here, about the clear lines drawn between right and wrong under that big open sky. But sometimes the lines ain't so clear. Sometimes the deepest wrongs ain't committed in the heat of a gunfight, but in the cold silence of a forgotten place. Imagine a man drifting, not running from the law maybe, but running from something inside himself, looking for shelter, not just from the biting wind, but from the ghosts that ride alongside him. He finds a cabin, tucked away, forgotten looking. Empty, he figures. A place to catch his breath, rest his weary bones. But some places, they hold on to their stories tighter than a miser holds on to his gold. Some places have echoes that don't fade. He thought the cabin was empty, just wood and dust and silence. He didn't know about the cellar. He didn't know that the deepest darkness sometimes lies right beneath your feet, waiting. Pull your chairs closer now and listen to the tale of Caleb Hayes and the secrets held fast by the Whisper Creek cabin. The wind bit first, a razor's edge against Caleb's exposed cheek. Then came the snow, not the gentle flakes of a Christmas card, but hard, stinging pellets driven sideways by the rising gale. He pulled the collar of his worn sheepskin coat tighter, hunching his shoulders as he urged his horse, Jericho, onward through the narrow, timber-choked valley. He'd been following the faint game trail for 2 days, hoping it led somewhere, anywhere, other than deeper into the unforgiving embrace of the Montana high country in late fall. Somewhere with a roof, a fire, a moment's peace from the gnawing emptiness that had been his companion since Shiloh. Caleb wasn't chasing gold or land. He wasn't running from a posse, not exactly. He was just moving, trying to outpace the memories that galloped alongside him, silent and relentless. Memories of cannon fire, the screams of wounded men, the faces of comrades who never made it out of that Tennessee hell. He'd thought heading west into the vast, empty spaces might quiet the echoes. It hadn't. The silence out here was just louder, amplifying the turmoil within. Jericho stumbled, pulling Caleb from his thoughts. The horse was exhausted, sides heaving, ice clinging to its mane and muzzle. "Easy, boy," Caleb murmured, patting the trembling neck. "Just a little further. Gotta be something up ahead." Hope was a scarce commodity, but desperation served nearly as well. The snow was coming down harder now, visibility dropping to near zero. Getting caught out here in a full blizzard meant a slow, freezing death. He scanned the landscape, squinting through the white curtain. Tall pines, skeletal aspens, snow-dusted rock faces, and then, nestled in a small clearing just off the trail, almost swallowed by the encroaching forest, a cabin. It was small, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud that had long since crumbled away in places. The roof sagged, a testament to heavy snows past. A stone chimney stood crookedly at one end, smokeless. No light shone from the single, shuttered window. Abandoned, most likely for years. Well now, Jericho, Caleb sighed, relief washing over him, cold but welcome. Looks like our luck ain't run out entirely. He led the weary horse towards the clearing. The snow lay deep and undisturbed around the cabin, confirming its emptiness. The door, weathered gray and slightly askew on its leather hinges, was latched but not locked. Caleb pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest, disturbing a silence that felt ancient. Inside, the air was frigid, thick with the smell of dust, decay, and something else. Something faintly acrid, like old grief. Moonlight, filtered through the driving snow and cracks in the shutters, provided meager illumination. Rough wooden furniture, a table, two chairs, a bed frame with a rotted mattress ticking, lay scattered, coated in a thick layer of grime and rat droppings. The hearth was cold, choked with blackened debris. Cobwebs draped the corners like macabre decorations. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Solid walls against the raging storm. Caleb led Jericho into the relative protection of the small, attached lean-to that must have served as a stable. He rubbed the horse down as best he could with a handful of dry leaves found in a corner, gave him the last of the oats, and promised him a better rest soon. Returning to the cabin, Caleb set about making it habitable, however temporarily. He forced the warped shutter open a crack, letting in more light and a swirl of snow. He swept the worst of the debris from the floor near the hearth with a broken branch. He found a few pieces of dry wood left in a dilapidated box near the fireplace, likely overlooked by whoever last inhabited this place, and managed, with numb fingers, to coax a small, sputtering fire to life. The flames pushed back the oppressive cold, casting flickering shadows that danced on the log walls. Caleb sank onto one of the dusty chairs, stretching his hands towards the meager warmth, the exhaustion settling deep into his bones. He listened to the wind howl outside, a mournful symphony accompanying the crackle of the fire. An uneasy feeling prickled at the back of his neck. Abandoned cabins weren't unusual out here, remnants of failed dreams or sudden departures. But this place, it felt different. It felt watchful, heavy, like it hadn't just been left behind, but fled. He tried to shake it off, just weariness playing tricks on his mind. He needed rest. He ate a stale biscuit, washing it down with melted snow warmed in his tin cup. The fire cast enough light now to see more details. Scorch marks on the floor near the bed frame. A dark, ominous stain on the rough planking beneath the window, mostly obscured by dirt, but undeniably there. He frowned. Accidents happened. Fires, injuries. Life was harsh out here. His gaze drifted towards a dark corner near the hearth. Partially hidden behind a pile of firewood remnants and debris was a small, crudely made wooden doll, its yarn hair tangled, one button eye missing. It lay face down, as if dropped in haste. Caleb felt a pang of unexpected sadness. Someone had lived here once. A family, maybe? A child had played on this floor. Where had they gone? Why leave a child's toy behind? He pushed the thought away, banking the fire carefully before stretching out on the floor near the hearth, using his saddlebag as a pillow. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the howl of the wind and unsettling dreams he couldn't quite grasp upon waking. filled with shadows and whispers just beyond understanding. The blizzard raged for 2 days. Caleb was trapped, a prisoner of the storm and the silent, watchful cabin. He rationed his remaining biscuits, melted snow for water, and ventured out only briefly to check on Jericho, who huddled miserably in the lean-to. The forced inactivity frayed his nerves. The silence inside the cabin pressed in, broken only by the wind and the skittering sounds of unseen creatures in the walls. The feeling of being watched intensified. He spent hours just staring into the flames, the past swirling around him like the snow outside. Shiloh. The chaos, the noise, the blood. He saw the faces, heard the cries. He'd enlisted full of patriotic fire, eager to preserve the Union. He'd come back, empty, changed in ways he couldn't articulate, haunted by the things he'd seen, the things he'd done. He'd drifted west, seeking oblivion, but the ghosts had proven stubbornly portable. To distract himself, he decided to explore the cabin more thoroughly, despite its meager size. Every surface was coated in years of neglect. He ran a hand along the rough log walls, peered into the empty cupboards. Nothing. Just dust and decay. Then his eyes fell on a section of the floor near the back wall, partially hidden by the rickety bed frame. Several floorboards looked different. Newer, perhaps, or disturbed more recently than the rest. Curiosity piqued. He knelt, examining them closer. They weren't nailed down as securely as the others. Using his hunting knife, he managed to pry up the edge of one board. It lifted easily, revealing not dirt or foundation stones, but darkness. A space beneath the floor. A cellar. He pried up another board, then a third, creating an opening large enough to peer down into. A musty, earthy smell rose to meet him, colder than the air in the cabin, carrying a faint, sickeningly sweet undertone he couldn't immediately place. It was a root cellar, dug directly into the earth beneath the cabin, common enough for storing provisions. But why hidden? Why were the boards loose? He needed light. He fetched a burning branch from the dwindling fire, holding it down into the opening. Rough earthen steps led down into the blackness. The air hung heavy, stagnant. The faint, sweet smell was stronger here. Caleb hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to leave it alone, to replace the boards and forget what he'd found. This wasn't his business. He was just passing through. But the silence of the cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The memory of the dropped doll, the stain on the floor, the pervasive sense of unease. It all coalesced into a gnawing curiosity, a feeling that something was deeply wrong here. He had to know. Taking a deep breath, holding the makeshift torch high, Caleb descended the narrow, crumbling steps into the cellar. The torchlight flickered, casting distorted shadows on the damp earth walls. The cellar was small, no more than 10 feet square. Empty shelves lined one wall, coated in dust and mold. The floor was packed earth. He swung the torch around, scanning the small space. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just a neglected root cellar. Maybe he'd imagined the smell, the wrongness. Maybe it was just decay. He started to turn back towards the steps, relief mingling with a strange sense of disappointment. And then the torchlight fell on the far corner. He froze. His blood ran cold. the hair on his arms prickling. It wasn't a pile of discarded sacks or old rags, as he'd first thought. It was bones, human bones, bleached white, jumbled together in a grotesque heap against the earthen wall. Not just one skeleton, but two, no, three. Two adult-sized and one heartbreakingly small. The torch trembled in his hand, threatening to extinguish. Bile rose in his throat. The sickly sweet smell suddenly made horrifying sense. This wasn't just an abandoned cabin. It was a grave, a secret, hidden tomb. The family who lived here, they hadn't just left. They'd been murdered, hidden away in the cold earth beneath their own home, their existence erased, forgotten by the world above. Caleb stumbled back, scrambling up the steps, gasping for air. The horrific image burned into his mind. He slammed the floorboards back into place, his hands shaking violently. He leaned against the cabin wall, heart pounding, the silence no longer feeling watchful, but screaming with the horror he'd uncovered. He had sought shelter from the storm outside, only to find himself trapped in a much deeper, darker storm within the cabin's silent walls. The skeletons in the cellar weren't just bones. They were a question demanding an answer, a crime crying out for justice, pulling Caleb Hayes, the drifter running from his own ghosts, into a past far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The storm broke on the third morning, leaving behind a world transformed, draped in pristine white under a painfully bright sun. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional, soft plop of snow falling from overburdened pine boughs. For Caleb, the beauty was lost, tainted by the horrific secret the cabin held. He couldn't stay here another minute. The air felt thick with death, the floorboards beneath his feet a constant, gruesome reminder of the cellar's contents. He loaded his meager supplies, saddled a somewhat recovered Jericho, and kicked snow over the last embers of his fire. He didn't replace the cellar floorboards perfectly. A small, deliberate gap remained, visible only if one looked closely. A marker, perhaps. A silent testament. He didn't know why he did it. He rode out of the clearing, not looking back, heading down the valley, hoping the trail eventually led to civilization. The image of the jumbled bones, especially the small one, was seared into his mind. Who were they? Why were they killed? Who had put them there? Questions buzzed in his head like angry hornets. Part of him, the part that just wanted peace, screamed to keep riding, to forget what he'd seen, to let the dead stay buried. It wasn't his fight. But another part, the part that had seen too much injustice, too much needless death at Shiloh and beyond, couldn't let it go. Those weren't just bones. They were people, a family. Someone had snuffed out their lives and hidden them away like trash. Ignoring it felt like a betrayal, not just of them, but of some fundamental decency he still clung to. By late afternoon, the trail widened, showing signs of more regular use. He spotted smoke curling in the distance. A town, or at least a settlement. As he drew closer, a rough wooden sign confirmed it. Whisper Creek. Population fluctuating. It wasn't much. A single, dusty main street lined with a dozen or so weathered buildings. A general store, a saloon bluntly named the Watering Hole, a blacksmith, a livery stable, a small church needing paint, and, inevitably, a sheriff's office with a faded star tacked to the door. A few horses stood hitched outside the saloon, tails swishing lazily in the cold air. Faces peered out from windows as Caleb rode in. The arrival of a stranger, clearly an event. He felt their eyes on him, curious, wary. This was a place that kept to itself. He needed information. He needed supplies. He needed to gauge the town, the law, before revealing what he knew. He dismounted in front of the general store, the wooden porch groaning under his boots. Inside, it smelled of coffee, leather, and dried goods. A stout woman with sharp eyes and tightly pinned gray hair stood behind the counter, polishing a glass jar. "Afternoon, ma'am," Caleb said, removing his hat. "Afternoon," she replied, her gaze sweeping over him, taking in his trail-worn clothes, the exhaustion in his eyes, the lingering tension around his mouth. "Looking for something, or just passing through?" "Bit of both," Caleb admitted. "Got caught in that blizzard up in the high valley. Need some supplies. Coffee, flour, maybe some cartridges for a Spencer." "Got all that," she said, turning to gather the items. "Nasty storm. Lucky you found shelter. Ain't much up that way." "Found an old cabin," Caleb said casually, watching her reaction. "Looked empty for years." The woman paused, her hand hovering over a sack of flour. Her expression became guarded. "Cabin, you say? Wouldn't be the old Miller place, would it? Tucked back in the narrow part of the valley, near the scree slope?" "Sounds about right," Caleb confirmed. "Rough shape?" She sniffed, resuming her work, but moving slower now. "Folks round here don't go up there much. Has a bad feeling about it. Miller's just vanished. Oh, must be 5, 6 years ago now. Left everything behind." She lowered her voice slightly. "Some say they just packed up and headed back east. Others whisper, well, whispers ain't facts." "What kind of whispers?" Caleb pressed gently. She hesitated, glancing towards the door as if afraid of being overheard. "Just talk. Indians, maybe. Or maybe old man Miller found something he shouldn't have. He was known to prospect a bit. Stubborn man. Kept to himself mostly. His wife, Sarah. Quiet woman. Had a little girl, Lily." The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken tragedy. Caleb thought of the small skeleton, the dropped doll. Lily. "Did the sheriff look into it?" Caleb asked. The woman gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sheriff Hayes? He rode up there once. Said it looked like they just pulled up stakes. Case closed, far as he's concerned. Hayes don't like stirring up trouble, especially when there ain't no one pushing him." She slid his supplies across the counter. "That'll be $4. Caleb paid, his mind racing. A family vanished. A prospecting father. A sheriff quick to close the case. It smelled rotten. "Appreciate the supplies, ma'am." "Martha," she supplied. "Martha Gable." "Caleb. Caleb Hayes." He deliberately used his real name. Gauge any reaction. None came. "Thanks, Martha." He stepped back out onto the porch, blinking in the afternoon sun. He saw a tall, broad-shouldered man with a star pinned to his heavy coat emerge from the sheriff's office. He had a stern, weathered face and cold blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Sheriff Hayes. He watched Caleb for a long moment before turning and walking towards the saloon. He hadn't seemed welcoming. Caleb gathered his supplies, tied them behind his saddle. He needed to think, to plan. Reporting his discovery to Sheriff Hayes seemed pointless, maybe even dangerous, given Martha's assessment. But doing nothing, that wasn't an option anymore. He thought about the doll, about Lily. Someone had to speak for them. As he was about to mount Jericho, another man emerged from the saloon, pausing on the steps. He was older, maybe 50, dressed in finer clothes than most, a tailored coat, clean boots, a string tie. He had an air of prosperity and impatience about him. His eyes, sharp and gray like flint, swept over Caleb, lingering for a fraction too long. He nodded curtly, a dismissal more than a greeting, before striding towards a sturdy wagon hitched further down the street. "Who's that?" Caleb asked the heir, half to himself. "That," came Martha's voice from the doorway behind him, "is Silas Thorne. Owns the biggest spread in the valley. Bought up a lot of land over the years, including some questionable claims. Thinks he owns the town too, pretty near." Her tone was dry, bordering on disdainful. "Best steer clear of him, stranger. He don't take kindly to folks poking their noses where he thinks they don't belong." Silas Thorne. Another piece of the puzzle, or just another hard man in a hard country? Caleb swung himself into the saddle. He needed a place to camp, away from prying eyes, a place to figure out his next move. He couldn't shake the feeling that Whisper Creek held more secrets than just the ones buried in the cellar of the Miller cabin. And exposing them might bring down a wrath far worse than any blizzard. He rode out of town, the weight of the dead heavy on his shoulders, the wary eyes of the living following him until he disappeared around a bend in the road. Caleb made camp a few miles outside Whisper Creek, in a sheltered aspen grove near a stream that hadn't yet frozen solid. He built a small, smokeless fire, more for coffee than warmth, and chewed on tough jerky while the pieces tumbled in his mind. The Millers vanished. The skeletons, murder. Sheriff Hayes, uninterested, possibly compromised. Silas Thorne, powerful, acquisitive, potentially ruthless. Martha Gable, observant, cautious, maybe a source of guarded information. What had Old Man Miller found prospecting? Gold? Silver? Or something simpler, yet just as valuable out here? Water rights? Land disputes were common, often turning bloody. Thorne bought up land, Martha said, sometimes under questionable circumstances. Could the Miller place have stood in the way of Thorne's ambitions? It was thin speculation, but it fit the grim reality he'd uncovered. He knew he couldn't confront Thorne or Hayes directly. He was a stranger, easily dismissed or silenced. He needed proof, something tangible beyond the bones themselves, something that tied the deaths to someone in Whisper Creek. Where to find it? The cabin. He'd barely searched it, driven out by horror and the storm. He had to go back. The thought filled him with dread, returning to that place, especially to the cellar. But there was no other way. He waited until the next afternoon, letting Jericho rest, gathering his nerve. He approached the cabin cautiously this time, circling through the trees, watching for any sign of disturbance. Nothing. The snow around the clearing remained untracked except for his own departure marks. The cabin sat silent, brooding under the cold sun. Tethering Jericho out of sight, Caleb slipped inside, his hand resting on the butt of the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. The air was still frigid, the silence oppressive. He forced himself towards the back, towards the loosened floorboards. He knelt, took a deep breath, and pulled them up again. The same cold, musty air rose from the cellar, carrying that faint, sickeningly sweet scent of decay. He couldn't bring himself to go down there again, not yet. Instead, he began a meticulous search of the cabin itself, compartment by compartment, driven by a grim determination. He sifted through the debris in the hearth, finding nothing but charred wood and ash. He examined the stained floorboards near the window more closely. Definitely blood, old and dark, soaked deep into the grain. A struggle had happened here. He ran his hands along the log walls, probing the crumbling chinking, searching for loose stones, hidden compartments. Nothing. He checked the dilapidated furniture again. Underneath, the rotting mattress ticking on the bed frame, tucked deep into a tear in the fabric. His fingers brushed against something small and hard. He pulled it out. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped, etched with simple floral patterns. It opened on a tiny hinge. Inside, miraculously preserved, were two miniature portraits, faded but recognizable. One was a woman with dark hair and gentle eyes. Sarah Miller, Caleb guessed. The other was a little girl with bright eyes and hair tied back with ribbons, Lily. His gut clenched. Holding the locket felt like holding a piece of their stolen lives. He turned it over. On the back, crudely scratched into the silver, were initials. SM from JM, Sarah Miller from Jedediah Miller. He tucked the locket carefully into his shirt pocket, a tangible link to the victims. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was something human, something real. He continued his search. In the lean-to, hidden beneath a pile of rotting hay Jericho hadn't touched, he found a rusted shovel with a broken handle. The blade was caked with dried earth. The same dark, clay-heavy earth he'd seen in the cellar. Circumstantial, perhaps, but damning. Who breaks a shovel handle digging a grave and just leaves it behind? Someone in a hurry. Someone panicked. His search yielded nothing else of significance in the main cabin or the lean-to. The cellar remained. Steeling himself, he lit a precious candle stub, shielding the flame with his hand, and descended the steps once more. The jumbled bones lay undisturbed in the corner, a silent, horrifying tableau. He forced himself to look away, scanning the rest of the small space. He ran his hands along the damp earth walls, feeling for irregularities. Near the back wall, behind where the skeletons lay, his fingers brushed against something embedded in the soil, a loose stone, larger than the surrounding rocks used to shore up the earth. He worked at it, digging around the edges with his knife. It came free suddenly, revealing a small cavity behind it. Heart pounding, Caleb reached inside. His fingers closed around a small, oilskin-wrapped package. He pulled it out, his hands trembling. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. He carefully unwrapped the layers of oiled cloth. Inside was a small leather pouch, and tucked beside it, a folded, brittle piece of paper. He opened the pouch first. It contained several rough, heavy nuggets of gold. Not a huge amount, but certainly enough to represent a significant find for a small-time prospector like Miller. Enough to attract unwanted attention. Enough, perhaps, to kill for. Then he unfolded the paper. It was a hand-drawn map, similar in its crudeness to the one Elara Vance had found in another story, another time. It showed landmarks Caleb recognized from the surrounding valley: a distinctive lightning-scarred pine, a waterfall on Whisper Creek, the cabin itself. But it also showed lines leading further up the valley into the rugged terrain near Silas Thorne's vast ranch lands, culminating in an X marked near a drawing of three jagged peaks. Below the map, Jedediah Miller had scrawled a few lines in faded pencil. Found the source. Richer than I dreamed. Up near Thorne's north pasture fence line. Told Sarah we could finally leave this hard place. Must file the claim proper before anyone else sniffs it out. Especially Thorne. He watches everything. Caleb stared at the map, then at the gold. This was it. The motive. Miller hadn't just found gold. He'd found it near, or maybe even on, land Silas Thorne considered his own, or wanted to be his own. Thorne, the man who bought questionable claims. The man who didn't like people poking their noses in. If Thorne had found out about Miller's strike before he could file the claim, a cold dread settled over Caleb. He had the motive. He had the bodies. But the map and the gold weren't definitive proof that Thorne was the killer. Anyone could have found out, could have followed Miller. It could have been opportunistic bandits, claim jumpers. But his gut told him Thorne was involved. The way the man looked at him in town, the warnings from Martha, it all pointed towards the powerful rancher. He carefully rewrapped the map and gold, tucking the oilskin package inside his coat. He had to get this evidence out of the cabin, somewhere safe. As he turned to leave the cellar, his candle flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows. He heard a noise from above, a floorboard creaking in the cabin. He wasn't alone. Someone else had come to the Miller cabin. Someone who might be looking for the very thing Caleb now held. He extinguished the candle instantly, plunging the cellar into absolute darkness. He drew his Colt, the click of the hammer echoing unnervingly in the confined space. He stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, listening, every sense straining in the black, suffocating silence, the cold presence of the dead surrounding him. The cabin above held a new living threat. Caleb remained motionless in the pitch-black cellar, the cold earth seeming to leach the warmth from his body. Above, another floorboard groaned under cautious weight. Someone was moving slowly, deliberately through the cabin. Searching? Or waiting? He strained his ears. He could hear the faint whisper of cloth brushing against the log walls, the soft crunch of boots on the dusty floor near the hearth. One person, it sounded like. Who? One of Thorne's men. Sent to ensure the secret remained buried? Or perhaps Thorne himself. Maybe even Sheriff Hayes, doing a bit of tidying up. Or could it be someone else entirely, drawn by the same morbid curiosity or rumor that had led Caleb here? He couldn't stay hidden in the cellar forever. His candle was out. The darkness was absolute. Eventually, the intruder would notice the disturbed floorboards, the entrance to the cellar. He had the element of surprise, but it wouldn't last. He needed a plan. His fingers tightened around the cold butt of the Colt. He could try to rush the steps, come out shooting. Risky. The intruder was likely armed, and Caleb would be silhouetted against the faint light filtering into the cabin from the opening above. He could wait, hope they didn't find the cellar entrance. Unlikely. They were moving too methodically. He thought about the map and the gold tucked inside his coat. That was the prize. That was the motive. If the intruder was connected to the murders, they might be searching for that very package. Perhaps, perhaps he could use it as a diversion. Slowly, silently, Caleb felt inside his coat, his fingers finding the oilskin parcel. He considered tossing it towards the far side of the cabin once he emerged, creating a distraction. But it was too valuable. The only real leverage he had. He heard the footsteps approach the back of the cabin near the cellar entrance. They stopped directly overhead. A pause. Then, the sound of wood scraping. One of the floorboards being moved. Light lanced down into the darkness, momentarily blinding him. He squeezed his eyes shut, then opened them, adjusting. A silhouette blocked the opening. A man, peering down. "Anybody down there?" The voice was rough, unfamiliar, laced with tension. Not Thorne's measured tones, nor Hayes's gruffness. Caleb didn't answer. He pressed himself against the cold earth wall, trying to melt into the shadows at the edge of the meager light. "Come out slow. Hands where I can see 'em," the man commanded, his voice tighter now. Caleb saw the glint of moonlight on a rifle barrel being lowered into the opening. Trapped. No choice now, but confrontation. But maybe not immediate violence. Caleb decided on a gamble. "Just looking for shelter," Caleb called up, trying to keep his voice steady, roughening it slightly. "Didn't mean no harm. Found this place empty." A short, harsh laugh echoed down. "Empty, huh? Funny. Looks like you found the floorboards loose. What were you really looking for, friend?" "Nothing," Caleb insisted. "Just checking the foundation. Storm must have loosened things up." A weak lie, but it bought a second. "Uh-huh." The man didn't sound convinced. "Well, come on up anyway. Nice and slow. We need to have a little chat." Caleb holstered his Colt, slowly raising his hands. He moved towards the earthen steps, deliberately keeping his movements unthreatening. As he climbed, he got a better look at the man waiting above. Lean, wiry, with eyes that darted nervously. He wore range clothes, dusty and worn. The rifle he held, a Winchester, looked well used but steady in his hands. He didn't look like a mastermind killer. He looked like hired muscle, and nervous hired muscle at that. Did Thorne send him? As Caleb's head cleared the floor level, the man motioned with the rifle barrel. "All right, step out, turn around." Caleb did as instructed, acutely aware of the rifle aimed at his back. He scanned the cabin quickly. No one else seemed to be present. "Who are you?" Caleb asked, turning slowly to face the man. "Name's Cully," the man said, licking his lips. "And you ain't answered my question. What were you doing down there?" His eyes flickered towards the open cellar. "Told you. Shelter," Caleb repeated. "Who sent you? Thorne?" Cully's eyes widened almost imperceptibly at the mention of Thorne's name, then narrowed. "Don't know no Thorne. I was tracking stray cattle. Saw your horse. Thought I'd check who was trespassing." Another lie. Caleb was certain. His nervous demeanor, the way he'd reacted to Thorne's name. He was involved somehow, or at least knew something. "Stray cattle don't usually lead a man to pry up floorboards inside an abandoned cabin," Caleb said dryly. He watched Cully's grip tighten on the Winchester. This man was jumpy, dangerous because of it. "Maybe I heard noises," Cully retorted defensively. "Maybe I thought you was hurt down there. Or maybe," Caleb pushed, taking a calculated risk, "you knew what was down there. Maybe you helped put 'em there." Cully flinched as if struck. His face paled under his tan. I don't know what you're talking about. There ain't nothing down there but dirt. Isn't there? Caleb held Cully's gaze. 3 skeletons, Cully. A man, a woman, a little girl. Ring any bells? Panic flared in Cully's eyes. He took a half step back, raising the rifle threateningly. Shut up! You don't know nothing! I know Jedediah Miller prospected up here, Caleb continued, pressing his advantage, keeping his voice calm but firm. I know he found gold. Maybe near Thorne's land? Maybe Thorne didn't like that. Maybe he hired someone like you, to scare Miller off. Or worse? Lies, Cully shouted, but his voice cracked. He glanced nervously towards the cabin door, as if expecting someone else. Was he supposed to meet someone here? Or was he just afraid of being overheard? Where's the gold, Cully? Caleb asked softly. Is that what you came back for? Did Miller hide it better than you thought? I didn't, Cully stammered, his composure crumbling. The rifle wavered in his hands. He looked less like a threat now, and more like a cornered, terrified animal. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked again, this time near the main door. Both Caleb and Cully froze, heads snapping towards the sound. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was another figure. Tall, imposing, holding a shotgun loosely but readily at his side. Sheriff Hayes. His cold blue eyes swept over the scene. Caleb standing near the open cellar, the panicked Cully aiming a rifle at him. Hayes's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Well now, the sheriff said, his voice dangerously quiet. Looks like I interrupted something. Dropping your weapon might be a good idea, Cully. Cully stared at the sheriff, then back at Caleb, trapped between 2 potential threats. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He seemed to realize his position was hopeless. With a trembling hand, he slowly lowered the Winchester, letting it clatter onto the floorboards. Sheriff Hayes stepped fully into the cabin, kicking the rifle away from Cully, his eyes fixed on Caleb. All right, stranger, start talking. What the hell is going on here? He gestured towards the open cellar with his shotgun. And what's down there that's got Cully looking whiter than yesterday's snow? The air crackled with tension. Caleb looked from the terrified Cully to the stone-faced sheriff. Was Hayes here to uphold the law, or to bury the truth deeper? Revealing the skeletons, the map, the gold. It could sign his death warrant if Hayes was involved with Thorne. But staying silent meant letting Cully, and whoever else was responsible, get away with murder. He held the fate of the Miller family, and possibly his own, in his hands. The moment of decision had arrived, sharp and unavoidable as a shard of ice. Caleb locked eyes with Sheriff Hayes, trying to read the man behind the badge, behind the cold, impassive stare. Was this a lawman doing his duty, or part of the cover-up? He thought of Martha Gable's words, Hayes don't like stirring up trouble. Uncovering a 6-year-old murder involving the valley's most powerful rancher was stirring up trouble on a grand scale. There are bodies down there, Sheriff, Caleb stated, his voice level, watching Hayes for any reaction. 3 of them. Been there a long time, looked like. Man, woman, and a child. Hayes's expression didn't change, but Caleb thought he saw a flicker deep in those blue eyes. Surprise? Or confirmation of something he already suspected? Cully made a choked sound, looking desperately at the sheriff. Bodies? Hayes repeated slowly, drawing the word out. He glanced at Cully, then back at Caleb. This the Miller family folks talk about? Seems likely, Caleb said. Found this too. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the tarnished silver locket, holding it so Hayes could see the initials. The sheriff's gaze sharpened. He took a step closer, peering at the locket. He didn't reach for it. Jedediah Miller's wife, Sarah, and their girl, Lily. He said the names flatly, acknowledging the identification. He turned his cold eyes back to Cully. You know anything about this, Cully? Cully wrung his hands, avoiding the sheriff's gaze. No, Sheriff, honest. I just heard noises coming from the cabin when I was looking for strays. Like he said. He pointed a trembling finger at Caleb. He's the one found him. He was down there. And you just happened to have your rifle aimed at him when I walked in? Hayes asked, his voice dangerously soft. He wasn't buying Cully's story. He spooked me, Cully stammered. Hayes ignored him, focusing back on Caleb. All right, stranger. Caleb, Martha called you? You stumbled on this place seeking shelter from the storm. Found the cellar, found the remains. And then Cully here shows up? That's about the size of it, Caleb confirmed. Except I don't think he was looking for strays. I think he came here looking for something else. Something Jedediah Miller hid before he died. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Something like what? This was the critical moment. Caleb hesitated for only a heartbeat. He needed to know where Hayes stood. He decided to reveal part of the truth, holding back the map as leverage. Like gold, Sheriff. Miller was prospecting. Seems he found a strike. He patted the outside of his coat where the pouch lay hidden. Found this down there too, near them. Cully gasped, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and avarice. Hayes's gaze flickered down to Caleb's coat, then back to his face. The sheriff remained unreadable, but the air grew heavier, charged with unspoken possibilities. Gold, Hayes mused. Always gold. He shifted his weight. The shotgun held loosely, but purposefully. And I suppose you think this gold is why the Millers ended up in that cellar? Seems a likely motive, Caleb said carefully. Especially if the strike was somewhere inconvenient. Somewhere someone powerful might want to keep quiet about. He didn't mention Thorne's name, letting the implication hang there. Hayes was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between Caleb and the terrified Cully. The wind moaned softly outside, the only sound besides their breathing. Finally, Hayes seemed to reach a decision. All right, Cully, he said, his voice hardening. You're coming with me. Got some questions for you back in town. Serious questions. He gestured with the shotgun. Hands behind your back. Cully looked like he might bolt, but one look at the sheriff's grim face and the shotgun convinced him otherwise. He complied meekly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Hayes efficiently bound Cully's wrists with a pair of cuffs produced from his coat pocket. And you, Caleb, Hayes said, turning his attention back. You'll come too. Need your official statement. He paused. And maybe you ought to hand over that gold. Evidence, you understand? Caleb met his gaze steadily. The gold stays with me for now, Sheriff, until I know who I can trust. It was a direct challenge, a calculated risk. Hayes stared at him, a muscle working in his jaw again. Caleb half expected him to raise the shotgun, to force the issue. Instead, after a tense silence, the sheriff gave a curt nod. Have it your way, for now. But don't think about leaving Whisper Creek. We ain't done talking. He prodded Cully towards the door. Let's go. Hayes marched Cully out of the cabin, leaving Caleb alone once more amidst the dust and death. He listened as they mounted up, the sound of hooves crunching in the snow receding towards town. Relief warred with apprehension. Hayes hadn't arrested him, hadn't confiscated the gold by force. He'd taken Cully into custody. Was it possible the sheriff wasn't involved? That he intended to pursue justice? Or was this just a move to control the situation, to isolate Caleb and deal with him later? Caleb couldn't be sure. He quickly replaced the cellar floorboards, making them look as undisturbed as possible. He retrieved Cully's dropped Winchester. Might come in handy. He needed to get the map and the gold somewhere safe, away from the cabin, away from prying eyes in town. He rode back towards Whisper Creek, but circled wide, avoiding the main trail. He found a secluded spot upstream from his previous camp, a small rock overhang hidden by dense brush. There, he carefully wrapped the oilskin package containing the map and gold pouch in another layer of cloth and wedged it deep into a crevice, covering the spot with loose rocks and leaves. Only he knew where it was. Insurance. Then, squaring his shoulders, he rode into Whisper Creek. He needed to face Hayes, give his statement, and he needed to watch, to listen. The arrest of Cully would send ripples through the small town. How people reacted, especially Silas Thorne, might tell him more than any direct confrontation. The game had shifted. The secret was partially out, but the danger felt greater than ever. He was walking into the heart of the mystery, armed only with his wits, his Colt, and the heavy knowledge of what lay buried, both literally and figuratively, in the cold Montana soil. Whisper Creek felt different as Caleb rode in the second time. News traveled fast in a place this small. Faces peering from windows weren't just curious now. They were anxious, whispering. He saw men gathered in tight knots outside the saloon, talking in low tones, casting uneasy glances towards the sheriff's office. The arrest of Cully, a known ranch hand often employed by Thorne, had clearly set tongues wagging. Caleb dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, looping Jericho's reins around the hitching post. He pushed open the door. Hayes sat behind a cluttered desk, filling out paperwork by the light of an oil lamp, though it was still afternoon. The small office smelled of stale coffee and gun oil. Cully was nowhere to be seen, locked in the single cell at the back, Caleb presumed. Hayes looked up as Caleb entered, his expression unreadable. "Took your time getting here." "Had to secure my horse and gear," Caleb replied noncommittally. "You wanted a statement." Hayes nodded towards a wooden chair. "Sit down." He pushed a piece of paper and a pencil stub across the desk. "Write down everything. How you found the cabin, the cellar, the remains. What Cully said, what you saw. Stick to the facts." Caleb sat, pulling the paper closer. He began to write, carefully recounting the events, omitting only the existence of the map and the specific location of the gold strike, mentioning only that he'd found a pouch of gold near the bodies. He described Cully's arrival, his nervousness, his reaction to the mention of Thorne's name, the confrontation. He wrote clearly, concisely. As he wrote, he felt Hayes's eyes on him, studying him. When he finished, he pushed the paper back across the desk. Hayes picked it up, reading it slowly, his lips moving slightly. He read it through twice, then set it down, tapping a finger on it. "Says here Cully got spooked when you mentioned Thorne," Hayes observed. "He did," Caleb confirmed. "Looked like he'd seen a ghost." "Cully ain't the sharpest tool," Hayes said dismissively. "Gets spooked easy. Works odd jobs around the valley. Thorne's hired him on occasion, yeah. but so have others. He seemed to be downplaying the connection. But why? He knew something about that cellar, Sheriff, Caleb insisted, or he was scared of who might find out what was in it. Hayes leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Maybe, or maybe he was just scared of getting blamed for something he stumbled into, same as you. He paused. Look, Caleb, this is complicated. The Millers vanished 6 years ago. No witnesses, no bodies till now. Bringing up old bones stirs up old trouble, especially when folks like Silas Thorne might get inconvenienced. Murder shouldn't be convenient, Sheriff, Caleb said quietly. Hayes met his gaze, a flicker of something, weariness, frustration, crossing his face. Out here, Mr. Hayes, convenience and survival often walk the same trail. Thorne provides work for half this town. His ranch holds this valley together, economically speaking. Accusing him of something like this, you need more than a scared ranch hand and some old bones. I found motive, Caleb stated. Gold. Gold makes people do stupid things, Hayes conceded. But it don't automatically point to Thorne. Could have been anyone knew Miller was prospecting. Caleb felt a rising frustration. Was Hayes protecting Thorne? Or was he genuinely hampered by the lack of concrete evidence and the realities of frontier power dynamics? So what happens now? You just keep Cully locked up? Hope he confesses? I'll question him, Hayes said evasively. See what shakes loose. Meantime, I told you not to leave town. I meant it. Stay out of trouble. Let me handle this. The implication was clear. Stop digging. Caleb stood up. All right, Sheriff, I'll be around. He didn't trust Hayes, not fully. The sheriff's reluctance, his focus on Thorne's power, felt wrong. But pushing him further now seemed unwise. He left the office, stepping back out into the cold afternoon. He needed lodging. He headed towards the livery stable first, run by a taciturn old man named Gus. He arranged for Jericho's keep, brushing down the faithful horse himself. As he worked, he saw Silas Thorne stride purposefully out of the mercantile, his face like a thundercloud. Thorne saw Caleb, stop dead for a moment, his gray eyes narrowing into slits. The air between them felt charged with hostility. Thorne gave a curt, almost imperceptible shake of his head, then turned abruptly and climbed into his wagon, snapping the reins sharply, rattling away down the street. He hadn't liked hearing about Cully's arrest. Caleb watched him go, his suspicions hardening. Thorne knew something. He was worried. He got a room above the saloon, cheap, noisy, but available. From his window overlooking the main street, he could keep an eye on the town's comings and goings. He spent the evening nursing a beer in the saloon downstairs, listening more than talking. The main topic of conversation, held in hushed tones, was Cully's arrest and the implied discovery at the old Miller place. Speculation ran wild, but Thorne's name was mentioned only in careful whispers, usually followed by nervous glances over shoulders. Fear of the man was palpable. Later that night, unable to sleep, Caleb stood looking out his window at the moonlit street. A light still burned in the sheriff's office. Was Hayes questioning Cully or conferring with someone else? Just as he was about to turn away, he saw a figure slip out the back door of the sheriff's office, keeping to the shadows of the alleyway. The figure moved quickly, furtively, heading towards the edge of town. Caleb couldn't make out who it was in the darkness, but their secrecy set off alarm bells. Driven by instinct, Caleb grabbed his coat and his Colt, slipped quietly down the back stairs of the saloon, and followed, keeping a safe distance, using the shadows himself. The figure led him out past the last houses towards the stream where he'd camped. They stopped near a dense thicket, looked around cautiously, then seemed to place something under a distinctive, flat rock near the bank before hurrying back towards town. Caleb waited until the figure was long gone, then approached the spot. His heart pounded. What had been hidden? He located the flat rock, lifted it. Beneath it, tucked into the cold mud, was a folded piece of paper, wrapped tightly. He unwrapped it carefully in the moonlight. It wasn't a confession or a map. It was a bank draft, a significant sum of money drawn on Silas Thorne's account at a bank in Helena, made payable to Sheriff Leland Hayes. The date on it was only 2 days ago, the day after Caleb had first arrived at the Miller cabin. Caleb stared at the draft, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Hayes wasn't just reluctant, he was bought. The payment was likely for ensuring the Miller secret stayed buried, maybe for dealing with any nosy strangers who stumbled upon it. Hayes arresting Cully wasn't about justice. It was about control, maybe silencing Cully permanently, or using him as a scapegoat. And Hayes telling Caleb to stay in town? It wasn't a request. It was a way to keep him contained, vulnerable. The sheriff wasn't just compromised, he was actively involved in the cover-up. Caleb was on his own, trapped in a town run by a murderer and policed by a corrupt lawman. He tucked the bank draft carefully into his coat alongside the locket. He now had proof of Hayes's corruption, but it put him in even greater danger. He had to get the map, the gold, and get out of Whisper Creek. But how? And could he leave knowing the truth about the Millers might be buried again, this time forever? The cold Montana night seemed to close in, offering no answers, only the chilling certainty that time was running out. The discovery of the bank draft changed everything. Caleb now knew he couldn't trust anyone in authority in Whisper Creek. Hayes wasn't just turning a blind eye. He was actively complicit, paid off by Thorne. Arresting Cully was likely theater, a way to control the narrative and perhaps set Cully up to take the fall, or silence him permanently. Caleb himself was a loose end Hayes needed to tie up. He couldn't stay in the room above the saloon. It was a trap waiting to be sprung. He couldn't confront Hayes or Thorne directly. That would be suicide. His only chance lay in retrieving the map and gold he'd hidden, using them somehow, and getting out of Whisper Creek alive. But the need for justice for the Millers burned hotter now, fueled by the sheriff's betrayal. Simply running felt wrong. He needed an ally, however unlikely. His mind went back to Martha Gable at the general store. She seemed sharp, disliked Thorne, and hinted she knew more than she let on. It was a long shot, but she was his only possibility. Waiting until just before dawn, the darkest hour, Caleb slipped out of the saloon unseen. He collected Jericho from the livery, Gus snoring soundly in his small back room. He rode silently, not towards his hidden stash, but back towards the Miller cabin. He had an idea, desperate and dangerous, forming in his mind. He reached the cabin as the first gray light began to filter through the pines. He dismounted, leaving Jericho ready for a fast departure. He went inside, his boots echoing eerily in the stillness. He pried up the cellar floorboards one last time, but instead of descending, he took Cully's Winchester rifle, which he'd kept, and propped it carefully near the opening, partially concealed, but visible if someone looked down. He took his own bedroll and placed it near the hearth, as if someone had recently slept there. He then scattered a few spent cartridges from the ones he'd bought from Martha near the fireplace. He roughed up the area, making it look like someone had camped there overnight and perhaps left in a hurry. His aim was misdirection. If Hayes or Thorne came looking for him or sent someone, the signs might suggest he'd returned, maybe panicked, maybe was still nearby. It might buy him time. Then he rode hard, not for his hidden gold, but back towards Whisper Creek, approaching it from a different direction. He tethered Jericho in a secluded spot well outside town, then proceeded on foot, circling around to the back of the general store just as the sun began to rise, painting the snowy peaks pink and gold. He tapped softly on the back door. After a moment, it opened a crack, and Martha Gable's wary face appeared. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise when she saw him. "Mr. Hayes? What on earth?" "Martha, I need your help," Caleb said urgently, keeping his voice low. "I know who killed the Millers, and I know Sheriff Hayes is covering it up for Silas Thorne." Martha stared at him, her face paling. She looked quickly over her shoulder into the dark store, then back at him. How do you know?" "I found proof. Hayes took money from Thorne," Caleb said. He didn't show her the draft. Too risky yet. Hayes is dirty. Cully's arrest is a sham. They know I found the bodies. My life isn't worth a plugged nickel if they find me. Martha chewed her lip, her sharp eyes assessing him. She seemed to believe him, or at least believe his desperation. "Thorne, I always suspected something rotten there. The way he got the old Henderson place after Henderson just disappeared, and Hayes turning a blind eye." She made a decision. "All right, get inside. Quickly." She ushered him into the back room of the store, a cluttered space filled with sacks, barrels, and inventory. "Stay here. Don't make a sound." Caleb waited, his nerves raw, listening to the sounds of Martha opening the store for the day, the bell above the front door jingling occasionally as early customers came and went. An hour passed, feeling like an eternity. Then Martha came back, her face grim. "Sheriff was just in," she whispered, "asking if I'd seen you. Said you weren't in your room. Horse was gone from the livery. Played dumb. Said maybe you just rode out early." "Are they looking for me?" Caleb asked. "Hayes is trying to look calm, but he's worried," Martha said. "Sent his deputy, a young fella named Peters, riding out. Didn't say where, but likely towards the Miller place. Caleb's misdirection might be working, buying him time. Martha, I found where Miller hid his gold strike, and a map to it. It's near Thorne's north pasture. That's why Thorne wanted him silenced." Martha's eyes widened. "Gold! So the whispers were true." "I hid the map and the gold," Caleb explained, "but I also have the bank draft proving Hayes took Thorne's money. If I can get that map, and maybe lure Thorne out, expose him and Hayes together." "That's crazy talk," Martha hissed. "Thorne has men. Hayes has the badge. They'll kill you." "They'll kill me anyway if they catch me," Caleb countered. "This is the only chance, for me and for the Millers. But I need help getting word out, creating a situation where Thorne and Hayes can't just shoot me down and cover it up." Martha paced the small space, twisting her apron. There's Doc Evans. He don't truckle to Thorne. And old Gus at the livery. He lost family to claim jumpers years ago. Hates injustice. Maybe if folks knew what was really going on." "How do we get the word out safely?" Caleb asked. How do we draw Thorn and Hayes into a trap? They talked quickly, formulating a desperate plan. Martha would subtly spread rumors that the stranger, Caleb, had found proof linking Thorn to the Miller murders and was meeting someone near the old lightning-scarred pine, a landmark from Miller's map, at noon to hand over the evidence. She'd make sure Doc Evans and Gus heard the rumor, hoping their sense of justice, or at least their curiosity, would draw them out as potential witnesses. Caleb's role was perilous. He had to retrieve the hidden map and gold, then get to the lightning-scarred pine. He hoped the rumor would draw Thorn, desperate to retrieve the map and silence Caleb and Hayes, needing to control the situation for Thorn. If other townsfolk showed up as witnesses, maybe, just maybe, he could expose them both. "It's foolhardy, Caleb," Martha warned, her eyes full of worry. "Maybe," Caleb agreed, "but doing nothing feels worse." He checked his Colt, took a deep breath. "Wish me luck, Martha." "Luck ain't enough," she murmured, pressing a small bag of jerky and biscuits into his hand. "Be careful." Caleb slipped out the back, heading on foot towards the spot where he'd hidden the oilskin package. He moved cautiously, sticking to cover, his senses on high alert. He reached the overhang, retrieved the package, the map, and gold feeling heavy with consequence inside his coat. Now, for the lightning-scarred pine. It stood on a rise overlooking a section of Whisper Creek, visible from a distance, a perfect, dangerous meeting spot. As he approached the rise, keeping low, he scanned the area. No sign of Thorn or Hayes yet, but he saw two riders approaching from the direction of town. Doc Evans, recognizable by his medical bag strapped to his saddle, and Gus from the livery, carrying an old buffalo rifle. Martha's message had gotten through. They were coming, maybe just to observe, but their presence offered a sliver of hope. He reached the base of the massive, ancient pine, its trunk blackened and split by a long-ago lightning strike. He positioned himself behind it, offering some cover, his Colt drawn, his heart pounding, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He checked the position of the sun, nearly noon. Then he heard them, horses approaching, not from town, but from the direction of Thorn's ranch. Two riders. Silas Thorn, his face a mask of cold fury, and Sheriff Hayes, his expression grim, shotgun resting across his saddle horn. They reined in 50 yards away, surveying the lone figure by the pine. "Hayes!" Thorn's voice cut through the cold air, sharp with anger and command. "There he is! Get the map! Now!" Hayes didn't move immediately. He looked towards the two figures approaching from town, Doc Evans and Gus, who had now stopped, watching from a safe distance. The sheriff looked trapped, his allegiance torn between his paymaster and the potential witnesses. "Hold on, Thorn," Hayes said, his voice tight. "Let's handle this careful." "Careful," Thorn spat, urging his horse forward. "He knows, Hayes. He has the map. I want it, and I want him silenced. That was our deal." He just publicly admitted the conspiracy. Hayes paled, realizing Thorn's blunder. Doc Evans and Gus exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. "So, it's true then, Sheriff?" Caleb called out, his voice ringing clear. "Thorn paid you to cover up the murder of the Miller family?" He held up the bank draft he'd retrieved earlier. "Like he paid you with this?" Hayes stared at the draft, then at Thorn's furious face, then at the watching townsmen. His world was collapsing. Thorn, seeing the draft, and realizing Hayes' corruption was exposed, seemed to snap. Useless, Thorne snarled at Hayes. He reached inside his own coat, pulling out a pistol. I'll handle it myself. Thorne spurred his horse directly towards Caleb, raising his pistol to fire. Simultaneously, Hayes, perhaps seeing his last chance at redemption, or simply reacting out of self-preservation, swung his shotgun towards Thorne. Time seemed to slow. Caleb threw himself sideways behind the massive pine trunk as Thorne fired, the bullet thudding harmlessly into the ancient wood. In the same instant, Hayes's shotgun roared, the blast hitting Thorne square in the chest, throwing him backwards off his horse. He landed heavily in the snow, motionless. Silence descended, broken only by the panicked whinnying of Thorne's horse and the wind whistling through the pines. Hayes sat frozen on his horse, shotgun smoking, staring at Thorne's body, then at Caleb, his face a mixture of shock and desperation. Doc Evans and Gus cautiously rode closer, their expressions grim. Caleb slowly rose from behind the tree, his Colt still leveled, his eyes fixed on Hayes. The corrupt sheriff was cornered, his paymaster dead, his crime exposed. The final confrontation wasn't with the mastermind, but with the man who sold his badge, his soul, for blood money. The lightning-scarred pine stood witness, the cold Montana air waiting for the final act of justice, or betrayal. Sheriff Hayes looked down at Thorne's body, then across at Caleb, the smoking shotgun still held loosely in his hands. His face was ashen. Doc Evans and Gus had dismounted, standing warily, Gus keeping his buffalo rifle trained loosely on Hayes. The truth was out, raw and ugly in the cold sunlight. He drew on me, Hayes stammered, looking at the doctor, seeking validation, absolution. He drew on Mr. Hayes here first, Sheriff. Doc Evans corrected him calmly, nodding towards Caleb. After admitting you were both complicit in covering up the Miller murders. We heard him plain enough. Hayes flinched, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He knew he was finished. The bank draft Caleb held, Thorne's dying accusation, the testimony of the Doc and Gus. There was no escape. It was Thorne, Hayes said quickly, desperately trying to salvage something. All Thorne. He found out Miller struck gold near his land. He confronted Miller. Things got out of hand. He killed them all, right there in the cabin. Then he came to me, offered me money, a lot of money, to keep it quiet, to say they just pulled up stakes. And you took it, Caleb stated flatly, lowering his Colt slightly, but keeping it ready. You let a murderer walk free. You buried the truth along with that family. I had debts, Hayes mumbled, shame finally breaking through his hardened exterior. Thorne had leverage. I didn't see another way. There's always another way, Sheriff. Gus growled, spitting into the snow. Just sometimes, it ain't the easy way. Hayes looked down at his badge, then slowly, deliberately unpinned it from his coat. He held it out, not towards anyone in particular, just letting it drop into the snow at his horse's feet. A tarnished star, symbolizing a broken trust. Take me in, Doc, Hayes said, his voice devoid of emotion. I'll sign a full confession, tell you everything. Doc Evans nodded grimly. Might be best. While Gus kept Hayes covered, Doc Evans checked Thorne, confirming he was dead. Caleb watched, the tension slowly draining out of him, leaving behind a profound weariness. He walked over and picked up the fallen badge from the snow, wiping it clean on his sleeve. Justice, of a sort, had come to Whisper Creek. Bloody, complicated, but undeniable. He then retrieved the oilskin package containing Miller's map and gold. He walked over to Doc Evans. "This belongs to the Millers," he said, handing the package over. "The gold, maybe it can go to any family they might have had back east. If not, maybe the town can use it for something good. A proper school, maybe." He unfolded the map. "And this shows where Miller's strike was. Needs to be filed proper. Maybe Thorne's ill-gotten lands can be broken up. Give smaller folks a chance." Doc Evans took the package and map, nodding solemnly. "We'll see. It's handled right, Mr. Hayes. You have my word. And the town owes you a debt." Caleb shook his head. "I didn't do it for the town. I did it for them." He gestured vaguely towards the valley where the cabin stood. "For Lily." He still held the locket. He opened it, looked at the faded portraits one last time, then handed it to the doctor. This should stay with them somehow. Later that day, after Hayes had been secured in his own jail cell under Gus's watchful eye and Thorne's body removed, Caleb prepared to leave Whisper Creek. Martha Gable pressed supplies on him, refusing payment. "You brought the truth out, Caleb," she said, her eyes grateful. "This town needed that, even if it hurt." "Some truths have sharp edges," Caleb replied. He mounted Jericho, the horse eager to be on the move again. He looked down the quiet street. Whisper Creek felt different already, lighter somehow, despite the darkness that had been exposed. Maybe now it could start to heal. He didn't know where he was going next. South, maybe, towards warmer climes. He was still adrift, still carrying his own ghosts. But something had shifted within him too. Seeking justice for the Millers hadn't erased his past, hadn't silenced the echoes of Shiloh, but it had shown him that even a man running from himself could still stand for something. That even in the darkest cellar, a flicker of light, of truth, could make a difference. He rode out of the valley, leaving the whispers behind, the vast western sky stretching out before him, a silent promise of distance, if not peace. Joe Rivers, Caleb Hayes, a man running from war who found himself fighting a different kind of battle in a forgotten cabin. He went looking for shelter and found skeletons, found murder, found corruption that reached right into the heart of the town, right up to the sheriff's badge. He could have kept riding, could have left the dead to their silent cellar, the secrets to fester. Lord knows, plenty would have. It wasn't his fight, folks might say, but Caleb learned something out there, something important. Sometimes, the fight finds you. Sometimes, confronting the darkness in the world is the only way to start confronting the darkness within yourself. He sought justice, not for himself, but for a family silenced, for a little girl named Lily, who never got the chance to grow up. He reminded the people of Whisper Creek, and maybe he reminded himself, that secrets buried in the earth have a way of poisoning the ground above. Truth, like water, eventually finds its way to the surface. The West demanded courage, yes. Courage to face the elements, the hardships, the dangers. But it also demanded moral courage, the courage to stand up, even when you're alone. The courage to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The courage to choose the right path, even when it's the hardest one, even when it leads right back into the storm you were trying to escape. What buried truths do we live with? What injustices do we choose to ignore because confronting them seems too hard, too inconvenient? Caleb's story asks us to look into those dark corners within our communities, within ourselves. If this tale of the Whisper Creek cabin struck a chord with you, if Caleb's quiet courage speaks to your own heart, please share this story. Let these voices carry. And make sure you subscribe to Voices of Justice for more stories from the crossroads of history and the human heart. Until next time, this is Joe Rivers, wishing you the strength to face your own cellars and the wisdom to seek the light. Keep listening for the voices, 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 listening for the voices.